This video is sponsored by LG. What's up, guys? Michael here to talk about the return of your favorite pandemic-era binge watch. That's right, Tiger King Season 2, which just dropped on Netflix. While we haven't seen the new season at the time of this filming, rethinking Tiger King over a year later had us feeling weird. Specifically, it made us wonder, was the most addictive and entertaining piece of media of 2020 kind of bad for the world? Now, questions about ethics have dogged Tiger King since its release. Still, we thought it was worth reconsidering this series in the broader context of the documentary genre in order to ask, what makes a documentary ethical? Let's find out in this Wisecrack Edition, Tiger King and the Ethics of Documentary Film. Spoilers ahead for everything that happens in Tiger King. But before we get into it, I want to tell you about today's sponsor, LG. More specifically, I want to tell you about LG's new OLED TV 65C1, which is a seriously cool piece of tech. It has self-lit pixels that turn themselves on and off, which means it can respond in real time to the contrast on screen. And those OLEDs are also capable of displaying the perfect black, which mere LED and LCD TVs physically cannot do. Imagine how much more intense scenes like the showdown at the House of Blue Leaves and Kill Bill would be on a TV like that. The 65C1 is seriously smart. Start with the Alpha 9 Gen 4 AI processor, which has a built-in deep learning algorithm. It automatically enhances details and adjusts the brightness and ensures smooth on-screen movement. And it even adjusts sound based on the type of content you're consuming, so you don't ruin your viewing experience by having to keep your thumb on the volume button. The 65C1 also has Dolby Vision IQ capabilities, which make these adjustments based on the director's intent of how the picture should look. That is so cool. And the Dolby Atmos function delivers multi-dimensional surround sound. You're practically in a movie theater, but there's no markup on the popcorn, and it's actually appropriate to take your shoes off. And the 65C1 is also great for gamers. It's seriously fast. Think 1 millisecond response time and low input lag, which means your games move as quickly as your brain does. That's thanks to the smooth playback experience, with no distracting tears or rips, so you can fully immerse your imagination in your favorite RPG. We're talking up to 120 frames per second, all with HDMI 2.1 bandwidths. And much like the way it can adjust itself to fit the genre of movies or TV you're watching, it's also intelligent enough to optimize the display by the genre of game you're playing. So whether you're a goose chasing a child or a warrior on a quest, your journey's gonna look great. And you can share that journey with your friends and fans thanks to built-in game app capabilities that make it practically seamless to stream on Twitch. And all of that power fits into a mind-bogglingly slim package. Seriously, this thing is thinner than my cell phone. Click the link in the description to check out the LG OLED TV 65C1 for yourself. Now, back to the show. To understand Tiger King's ethics, or arguably lack thereof, let's take a quick peek through documentary history. Now, the first films ever made were technically documenting reality, from trains arriving at stations to workers leaving factories. But audiences quickly got bored of these slice-of-life short films. They wanted stories. And stories they would get. Like any narrative film, real documentaries don't just showcase reality, they tell narratives with beginnings, middles, and ends. Those narratives vary, as noted by scholar Bill Nichols. He identified 6 modes of documentary: poetic, participatory, reflexive, performative, and the 2 most important for us, expository and observational. Let's start by looking at expository documentaries. We first saw these in travelogues in the 1920s. These shorts were made by Europeans and American filmmakers visiting exotic lands, filming supposedly truthful representations of people's lives there. They typically feature a voice of God narration that tells you exactly what to make of the image on screen. Unsurprisingly, such cultural depictions today seem quite condescending at best. Similarly, Tiger King has been critiqued for presenting some of its characters as sort of sideshow attractions. In the case of early travelogues, some have also been deemed downright inaccurate. For example, director Robert J. Flaherty, in his seminal 1922 film The Nook of the North, had his Inuk subject reenact customs of his ancestors. That meant, say, hunting a seal with a harpoon, though the tribe had long since switched to guns. Reenactments would remain a staple of the documentary genre. That's mostly because cameras were too big and cumbersome to lug around, so documentary shoots had to be meticulously planned. These early documentaries were expository expository in that they presented a specific point of view. And as documentary developed, expository films remained king. This was because many early documentarians mostly saw themselves as doing a public good. They focused on bringing attention to social ills like poverty, and in the process, they wanted people to know how they felt about those social ills in no uncertain terms. But that was about to change in the 1960s. This era brought portable cameras, and with it, cinema verite. These were observational documentaries that captured moments as they happened rather than recreating them. These films suggest a greater amount of fidelity to what is actually happening in real life at that moment as compared to reenactment-heavy docs. A famous example is the Bob Dylan documentary, Don't Look Back. The film intimately records the artist's journey on tour without comment, letting the audience come to their own conclusions about who Bob Dylan is. As with certain moments of Tiger King, observational documentaries give us a sense that we're a fly on the wall witnessing true events objectively depicted. As cinema verite took over the field, ethical considerations started being more widely discussed, according to scholar Kate Nash. See, while expository film does make an argument and present a point of view, the frequent use of reenactments and narration still suggests a sense of separation from the real-life events.
Détail curieux, dans les villages des Urdes, nous n'avons jamais entendu une chanson.
That is to say, you know you're seeing the filmmaker's perspective on reality. In contrast, observational documentaries seem to actually capture reality. Of course, even observational documentarians have to make narrative and perspective-changing choices. What to film, how to film it, and which shots to include. But by presenting apparently neutral slices of life, cinema verite can risk making people forget about the inherent subjectivity of filmmaking. Now, as documentaries evolved and started showing up more on primetime television, hybridizing modes became more common. And that's what we have in Tiger King. Part expository, part observational. While using a lot of the techniques seen in the narratives of expository docs and maintaining a fly-on-the-wall aesthetic feel at many points, the directors are able to have the best of both worlds. They can put together an argument based on their worldview while maintaining some of the sense of reality offered by observational filmmaking. So now we understand why Tiger King is so persuasive, thanks to its twin use of the exposition of the filmmaker's opinion and the truthiness of the observational style. So let's look at what this means for the show on a moral level. We think Tiger King's moral questionability comes down to one thing: voyeurism. Now, voyeurism is nothing new to documentary. It goes all the way back to photography, and a lot of this is class-based. Per Susan Sontag, for more than a century, photographers have been hovering around the oppressed, in attendance at scenes of violence with a spectacularly good conscience. Social misery has inspired the comfortably off with the urge to take pictures. You might be thinking, isn't it good for people to see photos of poverty so that they know it exists? Maybe. But as Sontag elaborates, there's more going on. She explains that gazing on other people's reality with curiosity, with detachment, with professionalism, the ubiquitous photographer operates as if that activity transcends class interest, as if its perspective is universal. Even in the best of cases, this process and perspective can be objectifying, resulting in what has been called poverty porn. Scholars Rebecca Mallet and Brett Mills explain that poverty porn objectifies and exploits people of low socioeconomic status in order to entertain while also generating strong emotional reactions of anger or outrage. In a similar vein, Tiger King satisfies the Netflix audience by offering a stereotype-confirming look at rural America, full of meth use, gun swinging, and so on. That's a sort of quote-unquote hillbilly cousin of poverty porn. As Russell Cobb, a professor at the University of Alberta, writes, the Tiger King is poverty porn for people who like to see people make hot messes of themselves while feeling superior to the residents of flyover country. Even though Joe Exotic might have money via his cub petting zoo, this series presents him with all the visual vocabulary of a stereotypical redneck. Think dirt bikes, guns, mullets, vests with no shirt. In this way, it leverages our cultural associations of white trash for pure amusement. Throughout the show, the Tiger King gawks at the subject's eccentricities, but rarely in service of the plot. There's very little attempt to understand them on a deeper level. We're merely marveling at them for entertainment value. Whether it's John Finlay's shirtless interviews or Joe Exotic's run for governor, the characters are most interesting at their most absurd, rather than at their most complex or most human. This tendency to view the subjects as sideshow attractions rather than human beings became abundantly clear in the Tiger King after show, with celebrity interviews interviewer Joel McHale. McHale, like much of the internet, generally treats the subjects like characters who exist for our own amusement. For example, after one worker describes his poor treatment by Joe Exotic,
he always tried to keep everybody smaller than him.
McHale responds not with compassion, but by asking,
right, and did you ever say anything like, well, you don't know how to pick a hairdresser?
He also treats some of the show's more tragic moments with a disturbing sense of humor. For example, he asks one worker, Saf, whose arm was bitten off, about his relationship with the tiger afterwards.
But he didn't look at your right arm and start licking his chops or anything?
Here, there's no recognition of the very real pain that Saf endured. Rather, it's a crystallization of the show's ethos. These subjects are here to entertain, even if the entertainment surrounds the most painful moments of their lives. Throughout Tiger King, any outrage you might feel over the objectively horrible conditions that the tigers and many of the characters live in is easily overshadowed by the entertainment factor. Their lives are presented as pure sensationalism. This is a risk in any documentary. Scholar Paula Rabinowitz went so far as to say that voyeurism and its attendant sadism is at the heart of the documentary narrative. When the objectified people on screen are seen through the gaze of the documentary filmmaker, they're at risk of being made what Rabinowitz calls the objects of the middle-class spectator's scopophilia, i.e., a love of looking. As a result, we stop thinking of the characters as individuals. Tiger King has a lethal combination of otherizing, poverty porn, and tabloid-like revelations. This creates a sense of lurid fascination rather than critical condemnation of what we're seeing. It's why Travis's tragic death, rather than viewed as the heartbreaking result of abuse and addiction, was treated as just another chapter of Tiger King's pulpy paper bag. The luridness is only augmented by the choice to show cruder parts of Joe Exotic's eulogy for Travis. This includes waxing poetic about his dead husband's testicles while his mother weeps in the audience.
If I was sitting there concentrating as short as I could on the computer to write a letter to a senator or a congressman or something else, he'd come and rub them balls in my face.
Pretty bleak vibes, even for a funeral. But Tiger King's own moral failings are reflective of broader struggles that every documentarian goes through. For scholar Calvin Pryluck, the documentary genre is fraught. For him, the struggle begins with the first act of asking someone to be on camera playing themselves. He writes that the use of people for our advantage is an ethically questionable undertaking, and its extreme, it is exploitation in the literal sense. According to Pryluck, there's an inherent power disparity between the person holding the camera and the person appearing. And agreeing to be filmed doesn't generally mean you're agreeing to the way documentarians will choose to portray you. In fact, Pryluck actually suggests documentarians try to collaborate with their subjects to avoid ethical issues and craft more fair portrayals. Of course, filmmakers often justify their intrusion into people's lives by evoking a real truth about the medium. It's long been used to expose hidden societal injustices or to teach people about important social causes. According to Pryluck, a responsible documentarian has to balance the society's right to know about an important topic with the individual's right to be free of humiliation, shame, and indignity. In this way, he explains, exploitation is justified through claims of society's interest in advancing knowledge. We can see this balance being thoughtfully negotiated throughout the genre. Take Harlan County, USA, which exposed the devastation faced by union miners in Kentucky fighting for fair wages and working conditions. Or Crip Camp, which highlights the struggle for disability rights in the 70s. So does Tiger King justify its arguable exploitation through its advancement of knowledge? It's debatable. The show certainly doesn't seem particularly concerned with its educational value, nor with what Pryluck calls the dignity, respect, and pride of the people in the films. And it doesn't necessarily raise any host of ethical issues that you could reasonably consider to be of public interest, unless you're super into really bad music videos. While Tiger King could purport to raise ethical questions about the way privately owned tigers are treated in America, the show generally seems more interested in gawking at its human subjects. The directors reportedly convinced some subjects to appear on screen by saying that they were trying to make the big cat version of Blackfish. That was the popular 2013 documentary which exposed SeaWorld's abuse of its captive whales. Compare Blackfish to Tiger King. It's pretty easy to see which one is earnestly trying to expose systemic animal abuse and which one is more interested in juicy drama. The lack of concern over the ethics of tiger breeding led to plenty of criticism by the media, including by Peter Frick Wright, co-producer of the podcast Cat People and writer for the magazine Outside. He criticized the fact that the filmmakers basically ignore the fact that Baskin seems to treat her tigers more humanely than exotic. Coupled with the extensive focus on Baskin's husband's disappearance, this clearly helped stack the deck in determining viewers' allegiances. This is part of the expository aspect of the film, which creates a narrative in which Joe is the flawed protagonist and Carol the intolerable antagonist. Tellingly, there are plenty of Joe Exotic fans, while Carol is pretty universally hated. Though if you're the lonely maker of this Carol Baskin fan art, please drop a comment. This results from the way the show exaggerates and hyper-focuses on Carol's admittedly annoying eccentricities like her obnoxious Facebook presence.
Hey, all you cool cats and kittens, it's Carol.
The camera scans every leopard-printed item in her house as if to say, "Is this lady a kook?" Again, this objectifying lens prevents us from seeing Carol as an actual three-dimensional person and renders her a caricature. And it's a lot easier to believe that a caricature would kill their husband. This is another example of how the filmmaker's selective framing can change the audience's response to people and events. Frick Wright also suggests that Tiger King actually represents a step backward for conservation efforts. He states that the show gives voice to the idea that breeders are helping wildlife by increasing their numbers. This is one of the most common arguments you hear from tiger owners and breeders. It's also intellectually dishonest, and the fact that the series does not give anyone a chance to correct is irresponsible. What's more, Frick Wright points out a major cinch in Exotic's defense of his business. He explains that virtually all privately owned tigers in the US are mutts who do not belong to any of the 6 distinct subspecies found in the wild, and therefore are genetically useless to conservation efforts. Basically, Joe Exotic's work is not helping regenerate the tiger population as the show might make you think. So the voyeurism coupled with lack of ethical concerns makes Tiger King look pretty sus. But does that make it irresponsible to indulge in the show as a spectator? Maybe not. Scholar and curator Minu Nurauzi argues that objectification in documentaries can actually serve a purpose. She writes, "Objectification works against empathic identification. In this way, it forces upon the viewer the issue of their complicity in the process of objectification through the very act of viewing." That is, voyeuristic moments like those in Tiger King could make thoughtful viewers reconsider their own role as spectators. These moments create what Nurauzi calls spaces for self-interrogation, in which viewers can ask, what is my role here? How am I complicit in maintaining this problem, that suffering? When it comes to responsibility, the viewer is as entangled with these questions as the filmmaker. In other words, maybe Tiger King, by forcing us to reckon with our own voyeuristic urges, is raising ethical questions, even if that wasn't necessarily the intention of the makers. In this way, the content we consume can serve as a mirror that forces us to evaluate our own complicity in its creation. This doesn't mean the filmmakers are doing good by indulging our voyeuristic vices. And of course, it doesn't mean that every viewer will have that self-interrogating experience. And for those of us who do recognize our voyeurism when we watch Tiger King, it might not quite convince us to turn off the TV. And that's understandable. This show is damn entertaining. But what do you guys think? Are we complicit with Tiger King's moral issues when we watch it? Can experiencing the discomfort of unethical voyeurism make us think productively about our own complicity? Or are we just looking for an excuse to binge Tiger King Season 2 this weekend? Let us know in the comments. Thanks to our patrons for all your support, and be sure to check out our podcast. Pat that subscription button like it's a tiger cub at Joe Exotic's petting zoo, and don't forget to ring that bell. And as always, thanks for watching. Later.